Sunday dinner at my house had been a tradition for 15 years. 3 generations gathering around my table, sharing stories and my famous apple pie. I've been cooking for my family for over 40 years, and I know every ingredient in my kitchen like I know the lines on my own hands. So when I woke up in the hospital fighting for my life, I knew with absolute certainty that someone at my family table had added something that didn't belong in my recipe. My name is Natalie Barnes, and I'm 72 years old. For the past 15 years, every Sunday afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock, my family has gathered in my dining room in East Memphis for what we simply call Sunday dinner. It's more than just a meal. It's the foundation that holds 3 generations of the Barnes family together. The sacred ritual that has survived job losses, divorces, graduations, births, deaths, and all the other upheavals that life throws at a family over the course of a decade and a half. The tradition started when my late husband, Charles, was still alive, back when the grandchildren were small, and Sunday afternoon was the only time we could guarantee that everyone would be in the same place at the same time. In those early days, we were all so busy with work and school and the demanding schedules of young families that Sunday dinner became our anchor, the one constant in our increasingly hectic lives. Charles passed away 7 years ago from complications related to diabetes, a disease he had battled for over 20 years with the quiet determination that characterized everything he did. Even toward the end, when his health was failing and he could barely make it from his bedroom to the kitchen without assistance, he insisted that I continue the Sunday dinner tradition because he understood, perhaps better than I did at the time, how much our family needed that weekly connection. I've kept the tradition going, not just because it's what Charles would have wanted, but because these weekly gatherings have become the cornerstone of our family's connection, the thread that weaves us together despite the geographical distances, generational differences, and personality conflicts that could easily drive us apart. Every Sunday, without fail, they come. My 3 children, Marcus, Denise, and Jerome, along with their spouses and children. 13 people total, spanning 3 generations, all crowded around the massive oak dining room table that Charles built with his own hands 45 years ago when we were newlyweds, saving every penny to buy our first house in what was then a working-class neighborhood, but has since become one of Memphis's most desirable areas. The dining room itself tells the story of our family's journey from young, struggling couple to comfortable middle-class grandparents. The china cabinet still displays the wedding dishes we received as gifts in 1975, now chipped and faded, but still beautiful to me because they represent the dreams we shared as young people who believed we could build something lasting together. The walls are covered with family photographs spanning 5 decades. Wedding pictures, baby pictures, school pictures, graduation pictures, military service pictures, vacation pictures, and holiday pictures that document the passage of time and the accumulation of memories that make up a family's history. The menu never changes, and that's exactly how everyone likes it. Fried chicken with my secret seasoning blend that I learned from my grandmother in Mississippi, a recipe that has been passed down through 4 generations of women in my family and represents a connection to ancestors I never met, but whose influence I carry with me every time I step into my kitchen. The chicken is always perfectly crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, seasoned with a blend of herbs and spices that creates layers of flavor that develop as you chew. Creamy mashed potatoes made with real butter and whole milk, never the artificial substitutes that so many people use today in the name of health consciousness.
I make them by hand with a wooden masher that belonged to my mother, whipping them until they're smooth and fluffy, then adding just enough butter and milk to create that perfect consistency that makes children close their eyes with pleasure and grown men ask for seconds even when they're already uncomfortably full. Green beans cooked with ham hock until they're tender enough to cut with a fork. Simmered slowly for hours until the beans have absorbed all the smoky, salty flavor of the ham, and the cooking liquid has reduced to a rich, flavorful pot liquor that some of my grandchildren like to soak up with cornbread. It's not the quick steamed, bright green preparation that health-conscious cooks prefer, but it's the way my grandmother cooked green beans, and it's the way my mother cooked them, and it's the way I've always cooked them because some traditions are worth preserving exactly as they were passed down to you. Cornbread that's crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, baked in the same cast iron skillet that my mother used, a skillet that has been seasoned by decades of use until it's as black and smooth as glass. The cornbread is slightly sweet, but not too sweet, with a coarse texture that comes from using stone ground cornmeal, and it's served hot from the oven with real butter that melts in the golden pools in the irregular surface of each piece. And for dessert, my famous apple pie that took me 20 years to perfect and has become my signature dish. The thing that people remember long after they've forgotten everything else about their visit to my house. The pie is made with a combination of Granny Smith and Honeycrisp apples, peeled and sliced to exactly the right thickness, tossed with sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and just a hint of lemon juice to prevent browning, and add a subtle tartness that balances the sweetness of the fruit and the rich, buttery flavor of the crust. The crust itself is a work of art, made with a combination of butter and shortening that creates the perfect balance of flavor and flakiness, rolled out by hand and carefully fitted into the pie plate, then topped with a lattice pattern that allows steam to escape while creating an attractive presentation that never fails to draw admiring comments from my family. I've never written down the pie recipe because it's not just about the ingredients. It's about the technique, the timing, the way you handle the dough so it doesn't get tough, the precise temperature of the oven, the exact amount of filling that creates the perfect ratio of fruit to crust, and the combination of spices that creates that perfect balance of sweet and tart with just a hint of warmth that makes people close their eyes and smile when they take the first bite. Over the years, all 3 of my daughters-in-law have asked for the recipe, approaching me with varying degrees of subtlety and persistence. Linda, Marcus's wife, has been the most direct, simply asking me several times if I would share the recipe or teach her how to make it. Janet, Jerome's ex-wife, who still occasionally joins us for holidays, used to hover in the kitchen during preparation, asking detailed questions about ingredients and techniques. Sarah, Denise's sister-in-law, who married Robert's brother, has tried the most creative approach, bringing me articles about family recipe preservation and suggesting that I should write down all my recipes for future generations.
But I've always promised to teach them someday, a promise that I've made with genuine intentions, but never quite found the time to fulfill. The truth is, that apple pie recipe is my legacy. The one thing that ensures they'll keep coming back to my table week after week, year after year. As long as I'm the only one who can make that pie exactly right, I know they'll continue to gather in my dining room every Sunday, drawn by the promise of something they can't get anywhere else. It's a small vanity, perhaps, but at 72 years old, I've earned the right to a few small vanities. The pie recipe represents power in a family where I sometimes feel like my opinions carry less weight than they used to, where decisions are made by younger family members who don't always seek my input or value my experience. But when it comes to Sunday dinner, I am still the unquestioned authority, the person whose approval matters, the one whose traditions set the tone for our family's most important ritual. Last Sunday started like every other Sunday for the past 15 years, with the familiar rhythm of preparation that has become as natural to me as breathing. I woke up at 7 in the morning, earlier than necessary, but unable to sleep later because my excitement about the day ahead always overcomes my body's need for rest. At my age, sleep comes less easily anyway, interrupted by the various aches and pains that accumulate over 7 decades of living. So I've learned to embrace the early morning hours as precious time for reflection and preparation. I began the familiar routine of preparing for 13 people, a choreographed dance that I've performed so many times that I could do it in my sleep. The chicken had been soaking in buttermilk overnight, a crucial step that tenderizes the meat and helps the seasoning penetrate deep into the flesh. I had seasoned it the night before with salt, pepper, and my secret blend of spices that my grandmother had taught me when I was barely tall enough to reach the stove, standing on a wooden step stool in her tiny kitchen in Clarksville, Mississippi, watching her weathered hands work magic with simple ingredients. The apples had been peeled and sliced the night before, a task that takes nearly an hour when you're preparing enough filling for a pie that will serve 13 people. I use a combination of varieties to achieve the perfect texture and flavor. Granny Smith apples for their tartness and firm texture that holds up well during baking, and Honeycrisp apples for their sweetness and delicate flavor that balances the assertiveness of the Granny Smiths. The apple slices were tossed with sugar and lemon juice to prevent browning, then stored in the refrigerator overnight so the flavors could meld and the sugar could begin to draw out the natural juices of the fruit. The pie crust was ready to roll out, having been prepared the day before and chilled overnight. Making pie crust is an art that requires patience and practice, and I've been perfecting my technique for over 50 years. The key is to use ingredients that are properly chilled, to handle the dough as little as possible to prevent the development of gluten that would make the crust tough, and to maintain the right ratio of fat to flour that creates the perfect balance of flavor and flakiness. I've always prided myself on doing everything from scratch, a commitment that requires significantly more time and effort than using convenience foods, but produces results that simply cannot be achieved any other way. Store-bought pie crusts taste like cardboard to me, with a uniform texture and artificial flavor that bears no resemblance to the buttery, flaky perfection of homemade pastry. I can taste the difference between fresh herbs and dried ones, between real vanilla extract and imitation flavoring, between butter and margarine, between chicken that has been properly seasoned and chicken that has been rushed through preparation.
Cooking for my family isn't just about feeding them, it's about showing them love through the time and care I put into every dish, about preserving family traditions that connect us to our history, and about creating an experience that engages all of their senses and creates lasting memories. When my grandchildren are adults with families of their own, I want them to remember not just the taste of my cooking, but the smells that filled the house, the sounds of family conversation and laughter, the sight of a table laden with food prepared with love, and the feeling of being part of something larger than themselves. By 9 o'clock, I was in full preparation mode, moving through my kitchen with the efficiency that comes from decades of experience. I put the chicken on to fry in my grandmother's cast iron skillet, the same skillet that has been turning out perfect fried chicken for 3 generations of our family. The oil had to be heated to exactly the right temperature, hot enough to create a crispy crust, but not so hot that the outside burned before the inside was fully cooked. While the chicken was frying, I prepared the other dishes, timing everything so that it would all be ready at the same time. The mashed potatoes had to be made fresh. They don't hold well and become gluey if you try to make them ahead of time. The green beans were already simmering with ham hock, filling the kitchen with their rich, smoky aroma. The cornbread batter was mixed and ready to go into the oven at precisely the right moment, so it would be hot and fresh when we sat down to eat.
The apple pie went into the oven first, since it would need the longest cooking time and would benefit from cooling slightly before serving. As it baked, the kitchen filled with the sweet, spicy aroma of cinnamon and nutmeg, a scent that never failed to make me feel happy and accomplished. By noon, the house was filled with the smells that had become synonymous with Sunday in our family. The rich aroma of chicken frying in seasoned oil, the sweet scent of apples and cinnamon baking in the oven, the yeasty smell of cornbread rising in the heat, and the savory fragrance of green beans simmering with ham. These were the smells of home, the sensory memories that would trigger happiness in my children and grandchildren for the rest of their lives, just as similar smells from my grandmother's kitchen still had the power to transport me back to my childhood in Mississippi. At exactly 2 o'clock, they began arriving in the order they always did, a pattern that had been established through years of habit and had become as predictable as the menu itself. Marcus and his wife Linda came first with their 2 sons, Tyler and Michael, pulling up in their silver SUV that always looked like it had just been washed and detailed. Marcus has always been my most punctual child, a trait that serves him well in his work as a loan officer at First Tennessee Bank, but sometimes makes him impatient with family members who operate on a more relaxed schedule. Marcus, at 45, bears a strong resemblance to his father, with the same tall, lanky build and serious demeanor that made Charles such an effective supervisor at the paper mill, where he worked for 37 years. Marcus had inherited his father's analytical mind and attention to detail, qualities that made him well-suited for banking, but sometimes made him seem distant or critical in family situations where emotions mattered more than logic.
Lately, Marcus had seemed more stressed than usual, though he never talked in detail about his work problems. I had noticed that he was drinking more than he used to, that he seemed distracted during family conversations, and that he was quicker to become irritated by minor annoyances like children making noise or discussions that went on too long. When I asked him about it, he would brush off my concerns and change the subject, but I could see the tension in his shoulders and the worry lines around his eyes. Linda, at 43, was a registered nurse in the cardiac unit at Baptist Memorial Hospital, a job she had held for over 15 years and genuinely loved despite the demanding 12-hour shifts and the emotional toll of working with patients who were fighting for their lives. She was a naturally nurturing person who had chosen nursing because she wanted to help people, and she brought the same caring attitude to her role as a wife and mother. Linda had always been my easiest daughter-in-law to get along with, perhaps because we shared a practical, no-nonsense approach to family life, or perhaps because she had never tried to compete with me for Marcus's attention, the way some daughters-in-law do. She was helpful without being intrusive, appreciative without being effusive, and genuinely interested in maintaining family traditions and connections. However, over the past few months, I had noticed subtle changes in Linda's behavior. She seemed more anxious than usual, more likely to check her phone during family gatherings, and more prone to making worried comments about money in the future. When I asked her about it, she would smile and say everything was fine, but I could see the strain in her eyes and the way she would unconsciously clench her hands when certain topics came up. Tyler, at 22, was my oldest grandchild, and the one who had always been most appreciative of my cooking and most interested in family stories and traditions. He was a senior at the University of Memphis, studying business, following in his father's footsteps with a plan to eventually work in banking or finance. Tyler had his grandfather's easy smile and his father's head for numbers, but he also had a warmth and emotional intelligence that made him popular with his cousins and comfortable with adults. Tyler had been my kitchen helper since he was old enough to stand on a chair and stir ingredients, and he was the one grandchild who had shown genuine interest in learning my recipes and techniques. He would often arrive early for Sunday dinner and spend time with me in the kitchen, asking questions about cooking methods and family history, while sneaking tastes of whatever I was preparing. Michael, at 16, was going through that teenage phase where he was all arms and legs and appetite, growing so fast that I swear I could see the difference from week to week. He had his mother's gentle nature, but his father's analytical mind, and he was developing into the kind of thoughtful, responsible young man that made me proud to be his grandmother. Despite the typical teenage tendency toward moodiness and self-absorption, Michael was never too cool to hug his grandmother and ask for extra cornbread, and he always thanked me for dinner with genuine appreciation. Next to arrive was Jerome, pulling up in his battered pickup truck that showed the wear and tear of constant youth in his construction business. Jerome, at 41, was my middle child and the one who had always been the most creative and independent. He had chosen to start his own construction company specializing in home renovations rather than work for someone else, a decision that reflected both his entrepreneurial spirit and his need to be in control of his own destiny. Jerome had been divorced for 3 years now, a painful ending to a 12-year marriage that had produced no children and ultimately foundered on fundamental differences in personality and life goals. His ex-wife, Janet, had wanted stability and predictability, while Jerome thrived on the challenges and uncertainties of running his own business. The divorce had been amicable but expensive, leaving Jerome with debt and forcing him to buy out Janet's share of their house. Since the divorce, Jerome had thrown himself into his work with an intensity that worried me. He was taking on too many projects, working 7 days a week, and rarely taking time for rest or recreation. When I suggested that he might want to start dating again, or at least pursue some hobbies outside of work, he would shrug and say he was too busy to think about such things. Jerome's construction company specialized in historic home renovations, work that required both technical skill and artistic vision. He had developed a reputation for quality craftsmanship and attention to detail that brought him steady work from affluent homeowners who wanted their renovations done right rather than done quickly. However, the business was also highly competitive, with larger companies able to underbid him on projects and wealthy clients who sometimes changed their minds about project scope and budget after work had already begun. Jerome had always been physically affectionate, the child who would climb into my lap for stories long after his siblings had outgrown such behavior. Even as an adult, he never failed to give me a proper hug when he arrived for Sunday dinner, and his hands always showed the evidence of his work, calloused and stained with paint and varnish, but gentle when he touched my face and told me how good everything smelled. Finally, Denise and Robert pulled up in their aging Honda Civic, a car that had seen better days but was still reliable enough to get them from their modest house in Midtown to my house in East Memphis. Denise, at 38, was my youngest child and the one who had always been the most sensitive and emotionally expressive. She had inherited my tendency toward worry and my need to take care of everyone around me, traits that made her a wonderful mother, but sometimes left her overwhelmed by the responsibilities of family life. Denise had chosen to be a stay-at-home mother, a decision that made financial sense when their daughters were small, but had become more challenging as the girls got older and college expenses loomed on the horizon. She filled her time with volunteer work at their school and church, activities that gave her a sense of purpose and contribution, but brought in no income to help with their family's increasingly tight budget. Robert, at 40, worked in pharmaceutical sales, a job that had provided a comfortable middle-class income for most of their marriage, but had become more precarious as the industry changed and his company downsized. Last year, his territory had been reduced and his commission structure had been changed in ways that significantly reduced his earning potential. He was spending more time on the road, working harder for less money, and facing constant pressure to meet sales targets that seemed increasingly unrealistic. Robert had always been a quiet, thoughtful man who preferred listening to talking and observation to action. He was a devoted father who never missed his daughter's school events and a supportive husband who genuinely appreciated Denise's contributions to their family. However, the financial pressure of the past year had taken a visible toll on him, making him more withdrawn and anxious than I had ever seen him. Their daughters, Keisha and Jasmine, brought energy and chaos to every family gathering. Keisha, at 19, was about to start her second year at Tennessee State University on a partial scholarship, studying to become a teacher like her great-grandmother had been. She was serious and determined, working part-time jobs to help pay for her education and maintaining the high grades necessary to keep her scholarship. Keisha had always been mature for her age, perhaps because she had grown up watching her parents struggle financially and had learned early that hard work and good grades were her ticket to a better future. She was the kind of young woman who made me proud to be her grandmother, responsible, ambitious, and committed to using her education to make a positive difference in the world. Jasmine, at 14, was all attitude and opinions, testing boundaries in the way that teenage girls do, while still being young enough to want to help her grandmother in the kitchen. She was going through that phase where she desperately wanted to be treated like an adult while still needing parental guidance and support. Jasmine had inherited her mother's sensitivity and her father's analytical mind, but she also had a creative streak that expressed itself through art and music. The usual chaos ensued as everyone settled in, a familiar dance of family dynamics that played out the same way every week. The men gravitated toward the living room to watch whatever football game was on television, settling into Charles's old recliner and the comfortable couch that had hosted thousands of hours of family viewing over the years. The women clustered in the kitchen to help with last-minute preparations, even though I had everything under control and their assistance was more social than practical. The grandchildren disappeared upstairs to my guest room, where they could use their phones and avoid being put to work setting the table or carrying dishes from the kitchen to the dining room. This, too, was part of the established routine, a predictable pattern of behavior that provided comfort through its very familiarity. "Grandma Nat, that pie smells like heaven," Tyler said as he sneaked into the kitchen to steal a piece of cornbread before dinner officially started. It was a routine we had established when he was little, and even though he was now taller than me and old enough to drink legally, he still felt comfortable enough to grab food from my kitchen like he lived there. "You just wait until you taste it," I replied, shooing him away from the cooling pie with a dish towel that had been embroidered by my mother decades earlier. I added a little something special this time. It was true. I had experimented with a new blend of spices, adding just a pinch of cardamom to complement the traditional cinnamon and nutmeg. It was a small change, but after 40 years of making the same recipe, I felt ready to try something new. The cardamom would add a subtle floral note that would enhance the apple flavor without overwhelming it, a sophisticated touch that reflected my growing confidence as a cook. "Don't change it too much," Linda said from her position at the sink, where she was washing the dishes I had already used for preparation, a helpful gesture that I appreciated, even though I would have been perfectly capable of cleaning up myself. "That pie is perfect exactly the way it's always been." "Some recipes are meant to stay the same," Marcus added, appearing in the kitchen doorway with a beer in his hand, his third since arriving, even though it was still early in the afternoon. Why mess with perfection? But I was excited about the small innovation, pleased with my willingness to experiment after decades of following the same routine. After 40 years of making the same dishes the same way, it felt good to add my own creative touch to a recipe that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in my family. It represented growth and evolution rather than stagnation, a refusal to become set in my ways just because I was getting older. At exactly 3 o'clock, we gathered round the dining room table for the ritual that gave meaning to our weekly gathering. The table was set with my mother's china, plates that had been wedding gifts in 1948, and had somehow survived decades of family meals without losing too many pieces to breaks and chips. The glasses were crystal that Charles and I had received as wedding gifts, and the silverware was the good set that we had slowly accumulated during our early years of marriage. The dining room itself was a shrine to family history, with photographs covering every available wall space and displaying 5 decades of birthdays, graduations, weddings, and holidays. Charles's presence was still strongly felt in this room. From the table he had built, to the chandelier he had installed, to the comfortable chair at the head of the table that no one else had ever occupied. The dinner conversation followed the same comfortable patterns it always did, the kind of easy familiarity that develops when people know each other well and feel safe sharing both good news and everyday problems. These Sunday dinners had always been a safe space where family members could talk about whatever was on their minds without judgment or criticism, a weekly opportunity to stay connected despite the busy schedules and geographical distances that could easily drive families apart. Marcus talked about his work at the bank, mentioning some new regulations that were making his job more challenging, but also more interesting. He was being considered for a promotion to assistant branch manager, a position that would mean more responsibility, but also significantly more money, and the kind of job security that seemed increasingly rare in today's economy. However, I noticed that he seemed more stressed than excited about the possibility, and he changed the subject quickly when Linda tried to ask for more details. Linda shared stories from the hospital, carefully avoiding patient details while describing the satisfaction she felt when helping people recover from heart attacks and other cardiac emergencies. She had been a nurse for over 20 years and still genuinely loved the work, even when it meant 12-hour shifts and dealing with difficult patients or demanding doctors. However, she seemed more tired than usual, and she mentioned that the hospital was talking about budget cuts that might affect nursing staff levels and benefits. Jerome mentioned that his construction company had landed a big contract renovating a historic mansion in Central Gardens, a project that would keep him busy through the winter and provide the kind of high-profile work that could lead to more lucrative contracts with wealthy homeowners. The mansion was a magnificent example of 1920s architecture that had been neglected for decades, and Jerome was excited about the challenge of restoring it to its original grandeur while updating the mechanical systems and adding modern amenities. However, he also admitted that the project was stretching his resources thin, requiring him to hire additional workers and purchase expensive materials before receiving payment from the client. He was essentially financing the renovation himself, betting that the final payment would be enough to cover his costs and provide a reasonable profit. Denise updated us on the children's school activities and her volunteer work at the church, sharing news about Keisha's academic progress and Jasmine's involvement in the school art program. Keisha was excited about starting her sophomore year and had been accepted into the education program, putting her on track to become a certified teacher in 3 years. However, the costs of her education were mounting, and even with her partial scholarship and part-time job, the family was struggling to cover tuition, books, and living expenses. Michael was having trouble with chemistry and needed tutoring to keep his grades up for college applications, an expense that the family could barely afford but couldn't afford to skip. Jasmine was dealing with typical 14-year-old drama involving friends, social media, and her desperate desire to be treated like an adult while still needing parental guidance and support. Robert talked about his job search and some promising leads in the pharmaceutical industry, though he admitted that the market was highly competitive and many companies were still downsizing rather than hiring. The company restructuring had been difficult for their family financially, but he remained optimistic about finding something even better than what he had lost. However, I could see the strain in his eyes, and the way his shoulders tensed when the conversation turned to money or future plans. Robert had always been a proud man who took his role as provider seriously, and the reduction in his income had been a blow to his self-esteem as well as his family's financial security. It was the kind of easy, comfortable conversation that happens when people know each other well and feel supported by their family. We talked about work and school, about plans for the holidays, about minor health concerns and major life decisions. Tyler mentioned that he was thinking about proposing to his girlfriend after graduation, which led to a lengthy discussion about the cost of weddings and the importance of financial planning for young couples. The conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic, touching on everything from local politics to family gossip to plans for upcoming birthdays and holidays. These were the moments that made all the preparation and cleanup worthwhile. The sense of connection and belonging that comes from being part of a family that chooses to prioritize time together despite all the competing demands of modern life. After the main course, I brought out the apple pie, still warm from the oven and fragrant with the new spice blend I had tried. The crust was golden brown and flaky, and the filling had that perfect consistency, not too runny, not too thick, with just enough liquid to bind the apples together without making the bottom crust soggy. Everyone praised the pie, as they always did, but several people commented on the new flavor profile, detecting something different, but unable to identify exactly what had changed. "This tastes different, Grandma," Jasmine said, taking a careful bite and thinking about it the way she did when she was trying to identify ingredients in cooking shows. "It's good different, but what did you do?" "Just a little experiment," I replied, pleased that the cardamom was noticeable but not overwhelming. I thought it was time to try something new after all these years. "Don't change it too much," Marcus said, echoing what Linda had said earlier. "This pie is perfect the way it's always been." "Some things are worth keeping exactly the same," Robert added, taking a second slice that was probably larger than he should have eaten, given his ongoing struggle to lose the weight he had gained during his period of unemployment stress. I ate 2 pieces of pie myself, savoring the way the cardamom enhanced the other flavors without dominating them. It was a successful experiment, and I was already thinking about other small changes I might try in future weeks. Maybe a touch of ginger around Christmas time or a hint of vanilla in the summer when peaches were in season. The conversation continued as we ate, moving from light topics to more serious family discussions. Denise mentioned that she and Robert were worried about Keisha's college expenses and were considering taking out a second mortgage on their house to cover the costs that her scholarship didn't cover. The idea of putting their home at risk was frightening, but they couldn't see any other way to ensure that Keisha could complete her education. Jerome talked about the challenges of running a small business and the stress of competing with larger construction companies that could underbid him on projects because they had more resources and could afford to take losses on individual jobs in order to build market share. He was considering specializing even further in historic preservation work, which would reduce his competition but also limit his potential market. Marcus and Linda seemed to be doing well financially compared to the rest of the family. But Linda mentioned that the hospital was talking about budget cuts that might affect nursing staff, and Marcus admitted that the banking industry was more competitive than it used to be, with younger loan officers coming in with better technology skills and more aggressive sales techniques. Even in the midst of these concerns, though, the overall mood was positive and supportive. This was a family that looked out for each other, that celebrated successes, and rallied around members who were struggling. The Sunday dinner tradition had created a space where people felt comfortable being vulnerable about their fears and hopes, where problems could be shared and advice could be offered in an atmosphere of love and acceptance. By 6 o'clock, Everyone had gone home, leaving me with the usual collection of dirty dishes, leftover food, and the satisfied exhaustion that comes from hosting a successful family gathering. I cleaned up slowly, enjoying the quiet after the afternoon's chaos and already thinking ahead to the following Sunday's menu. I packaged leftovers for Jerome to take home. He lived alone now and rarely cooked for himself, surviving mostly on takeout and convenience food that provided adequate nutrition but none of the comfort and satisfaction that comes from home-cooked meals. I sent Denise home with extra cornbread and green beans, knowing that having a few prepared dishes would help her stretch their grocery budget and give her one less thing to worry about during the busy week ahead. I made sure Tyler had a container of pie to take back to his dorm room, even though I knew he would probably eat it all before his roommates got a chance to taste it. Tyler had always had a sweet tooth and an appreciation for homemade desserts that made him my most enthusiastic customer for experimental recipes and new flavor combinations. I went to bed that night feeling satisfied and content, the way I always did after a successful Sunday dinner. The family was healthy and generally happy, even if they were all facing various challenges and stresses. The food had been well received, the conversation had been engaging, and the tradition that Charles and I had started so many years ago was continuing to bring our family together in meaningful ways. The new spice blend had been a success, and I was looking forward to trying other small innovations in the coming weeks. After 40 years of cooking the same dishes the same way, it felt liberating to experiment a little, to add my own creative touches to recipes that had been passed down through generations. I woke up around 3 in the morning feeling nauseated and dizzy, symptoms that initially seemed like they might be the result of eating too much rich food, or perhaps the beginning of a stomach bug that one of the grandchildren might have brought to dinner. At 72, I had learned to expect various aches and pains that came with aging, and minor digestive upsets were not uncommon after large family meals. But the symptoms quickly got worse in ways that didn't feel like normal illness. My heart was racing in an irregular pattern that felt different from the normal cardiac issues I had been managing for the past 5 years under the care of a cardiologist who had prescribed digoxin to help regulate my heart rhythm. This was something else entirely, a frightening acceleration and irregularity that made me feel like my heart might simply stop beating. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, and I was having trouble focusing my vision. The room seemed to be spinning, and I felt like I might faint if I tried to stand up. These were not symptoms I had ever experienced before, and they were escalating rapidly in a way that frightened me more than I wanted to admit. By 4 o'clock, I was vomiting uncontrollably and experiencing severe abdominal pain that felt like someone was twisting my intestines with a knife. The nausea was unlike anything I had ever experienced, not the gradual queasiness of food poisoning or the flu, but sudden, violent waves that left me weak and disoriented and unable to think clearly about what might be causing such severe symptoms. The pain was accompanied by a sense of impending doom that seemed completely out of proportion to what should have been a minor digestive upset. I found myself thinking about Charles and wondering if this was how he had felt during his final illness, if this overwhelming sense of something being terribly wrong was the way death announced itself. I managed to call 911 before I collapsed in my bathroom, my legs giving out as another wave of nausea and dizziness overwhelmed me. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the sound of sirens in the distance and the terrifying realization that something was seriously wrong with me, something that went far beyond normal illness or the expected infirmities of old age. I woke up in the emergency room at Methodist University Hospital with IV lines in both arms and monitors beeping around me like electronic sentries keeping watch over my vital signs. A young doctor with kind eyes and a concerned expression was checking my chart and looking at me with the focused attention that medical professionals reserve for puzzling cases that don't fit into neat diagnostic categories. "Mrs. Barnes, can you hear me?"
she was saying, her voice seeming to come from a great distance, even though she was standing right beside my bed. "You're in the hospital. You were brought in by ambulance about 3 hours ago." "What happened to me?" I asked, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. My throat felt raw, probably from the vomiting, and my mouth was dry despite the IV fluids that were flowing into my system in an attempt to restore the electrolyte balance that had been disrupted by hours of violent illness.
"We're still running tests, but it appears you've experienced some kind of poisoning," the doctor replied, pulling up a chair beside my bed in a gesture that suggested she had time to talk and wanted me to feel comfortable asking questions. "Your symptoms are consistent with ingestion of a toxic substance, but we need to determine what it was before we can treat you properly." Poisoning. The word hit me like a physical blow, reverberating through my mind as I tried to process what it meant. I had been poisoned, but how? By what? By whom? I'd eaten the same food as everyone else at Sunday dinner, prepared in my own kitchen, with ingredients I had bought myself from stores I had been shopping at for decades. As someone who had been taking heart medication for several years, I had learned quite a bit about cardiac drugs and their effects, partly out of curiosity and partly out of a desire to understand my own medical condition. My cardiologist had been thorough in explaining how digoxin worked, what side effects to watch for, and what symptoms might indicate that my dosage needed to be adjusted. The combination of symptoms I was experiencing, severe nausea, irregular heartbeat, vision problems, and abdominal pain, reminded me of information I had read about digitalis toxicity, the dangerous condition that could result from taking too much of the heart medication that had been keeping me alive for the past 5 years. "Doctor, I think you should test for digitalis," I said, the words coming to me with sudden clarity as my medical knowledge connected with my current situation. "I take digoxin for my heart condition, and these symptoms are consistent with digitalis poisoning." The doctor looked surprised but impressed by my medical awareness. "That's very observant, Mrs. Barnes. We'll add digitalis to the toxicology panel immediately. But I have to ask, is there any way you could have accidentally taken too much of your medication?" "No," I replied with absolute certainty. "I use a weekly pill organizer that I fill every Sunday night after dinner, and I'm very careful about my medications. I know exactly how much digoxin I take and when I take it. Someone else must have given this to me." "Are you saying you think someone deliberately poisoned you?" "I'm saying that I've been taking the same heart medication for 5 years, and I know the difference between my normal therapeutic dose and a toxic dose. This was deliberate, and it was administered by someone who knew it would interact with my existing medication to create a potentially fatal situation." The doctor made extensive notes in my chart and assured me that they would run comprehensive toxicology tests to determine exactly what had caused my symptoms. She also mentioned that they would need to contact the police if the tests confirmed deliberate poisoning, which was exactly what I expected and wanted. If someone had tried to kill me, I wanted them caught and punished. The toxicology results, when they came back 6 hours later, confirmed what I already suspected. My blood contained levels of digitalis that were nearly 15 times higher than my normal therapeutic dose. According to Dr. Patricia Hayes, the cardiologist who had been called in to consult on my case, I had consumed enough digitalis to kill someone my age and weight, and I was extraordinarily lucky to be alive. "Mrs. Barnes, the amount of digitalis in your system should have caused complete cardiac arrest within 2 to 4 hours of ingestion," Dr. Hayes explained as she reviewed my test results with the gravity that the situation deserved. "The fact that you survived long enough to get medical treatment is remarkable. Your heart is stronger than most people your age, probably because of the regular exercise and healthy diet you've maintained throughout your life. How was it administered? Do you know?" "Based on the absorption patterns and the timing of your symptoms, it appears you ingested a large amount of digitalis approximately 4 to 6 hours before your symptoms began. That timing is consistent with oral administration mixed with food rather than injection or inhalation. My apple pie, I said, the realization hitting me with crushing certainty. Someone put digitalis in my apple pie. Dr. Hayes nodded grimly. That would be consistent with the evidence. The person who did this had medical knowledge. They knew exactly how digitalis would interact with your existing heart medication, and they calculated a dose that should have been fatal for someone with your medical history. But they miscalculated something. Or they didn't expect you to seek medical attention so quickly. Many elderly people might have attributed the initial symptoms to normal digestive upset and waited until morning to call for help. If you had died in your sleep, the death would likely have been attributed to your existing heart condition rather than poisoning.
The realization that someone had planned my death to look like a natural cardiac event was almost as horrifying as the poisoning itself. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of rage. It was a calculated murder attempt by someone who understood medicine, who knew about my heart condition, and who had access to my kitchen during Sunday dinner. Someone had sat at my table, eaten my food, praised my cooking, and tried to murder me using my own signature dish as the delivery method for poison. The violation of trust was almost unbearable, made worse by the knowledge that my attacker was almost certainly someone I loved. Detective Sarah Coleman arrived at my hospital bed the next morning, a middle-aged Black woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense manner that immediately made me feel confident in her ability to solve this case. She carried herself with the authority of someone who had seen enough human cruelty to be surprised by very little, but who still cared enough to be outraged by it. Mrs. Barnes, Detective Coleman with the Memphis Police Department. The hospital has reported that you were the victim of deliberate poisoning, and we need to investigate this as attempted murder. I understand, Detective, and I can tell you exactly when and where it happened. The doctor mentioned that you believe the poison was administered in food you prepared yourself. Can you walk me through the events of yesterday, starting from when you began preparation and ending when everyone left? I spent the next hour giving Detective Coleman a detailed account of Sunday dinner, from my morning preparations through the cleanup after everyone had gone home. I explained about the family tradition, the regular attendees, the timing of food preparation and service, and the specific moment when the apple pie had been served and eaten. I described each family member in detail, their relationships to each other, their usual behavior during Sunday dinners, and any recent changes I had noticed in their attitudes or circumstances. I explained about the family dynamics, the financial pressures that various members were facing, and the inheritance expectations that everyone understood, even though we rarely discussed them openly. Mrs. Barnes, if the digitalis was in the pie filling, wouldn't everyone who ate it have been affected? Not necessarily. Digitalis is particularly dangerous for people who already take heart medication because it compounds the effect. For people with normal cardiac function, a small amount might cause mild nausea or digestive upset, but it wouldn't be life-threatening. Did anyone else report feeling sick after dinner? I don't know. I've been unconscious for most of the past day, and no one has contacted me to report any illness. Detective Coleman made extensive notes and explained that she would be interviewing all of my family members to ask about their health after Sunday dinner and to establish who had access to my kitchen during the meal preparation and serving. She would also be investigating their backgrounds to determine who might have both the opportunity and the motive to attempt murder.
Mrs. Barnes, I have to ask you a difficult question. Is there anyone in your family who might have a reason to harm you? It was the question I had been dreading, but also expecting. The reality was that someone at my Sunday dinner table had tried to kill me, and that someone was almost certainly a member of my own family. The logistics of accessing my kitchen during dinner, the knowledge of my heart medication, and the familiarity with my cooking routines all pointed to an inside job. Detective, I need some time to think about that question. This is my family we're talking about, people I've loved and trusted for decades. I understand this is difficult, but if someone tried to murder you, we need to identify them before they have another opportunity. Poisoners often try again if their first attempt fails, especially if they think their method wasn't detected. The detective's words sent a chill through me. Not only had someone in my family tried to kill me once, but they might try again if they realized I had survived and could potentially identify them. I was no longer safe in my own home, no longer able to trust the people I had loved unconditionally for my entire adult life. After Detective Coleman left, I was alone with my thoughts for the first time since the poisoning, and the isolation was almost unbearable. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of my family members around my dining table, laughing and eating and acting like people who would never hurt me.
But one of them had put digitalis in my apple pie, knowing that it would interact with my heart medication and potentially kill me. One of them had sat at my table, eaten my food, praised my cooking, and tried to murder me for reasons I couldn't begin to understand. The question was which one and why. Over the next 2 days, Detective Coleman conducted interviews with each of my family members. The results of those interviews were both disturbing and informative, painting a picture of a family under more financial and emotional pressure than I had realized during our weekly Sunday dinner conversations. The detective discovered that several family members had experienced mild symptoms after Sunday dinner that were consistent with low-level digitalis poisoning, confirming that the toxin had been in the pie that we had all shared. Jerome had felt mildly nauseated after dinner, but had attributed it to eating too much rich food. Denise had experienced a headache and some dizziness that evening, but thought it was stress-related. Michael had thrown up once before bed, but assumed it was because he had eaten 3 pieces of pie on top of a large dinner. Several family members had shown mild symptoms of digitalis poisoning, which proved that the toxin had been in the pie filling rather than administered to me individually. But because they didn't take heart medication like I did, their symptoms were relatively minor compared to my life-threatening reaction.
More troubling were the details that Detective Coleman had uncovered about my family members' financial situations, information that I had been largely unaware of despite our close relationships and regular family gatherings. The picture that emerged was one of a family in crisis, with each household facing serious financial pressures that they had been hiding from me and from each other. Marcus was facing serious financial problems that were much worse than anything he had mentioned during our Sunday dinner conversations. The detective had discovered that he had been making unauthorized investment decisions with clients' money at the bank, trying to generate higher returns that would impress his supervisors and secure the promotion he desperately needed. The investments had failed catastrophically, leaving him responsible for over $200,000 in client losses that he had been trying to conceal through increasingly complex accounting manipulations. Marcus was facing the possibility of criminal charges for embezzlement and was desperate to find money to cover the losses before the bank's quarterly audit revealed the full extent of his unauthorized activities. The pressure had been building for months, affecting his sleep, his marriage, and his relationship with his children. Linda had been asking questions about his increased drinking and erratic behavior, but Marcus had been unable to tell her the truth about the magnitude of his professional crisis. Jerome's construction company was in much worse financial shape than he had let on during family dinners. The detective learned that he was behind on payments to suppliers and subcontractors, had been forced to lay off most of his crew, and was facing several lawsuits from clients who had paid deposits for work that he couldn't afford to complete.
The historic mansion renovation project that he had described so enthusiastically during Sunday dinner was actually making his financial situation worse rather than better.
The wealthy client had been slow to make progress payments, leaving Jerome to finance the expensive materials and skilled labor from his own increasingly depleted resources. Jerome's business was on the verge of bankruptcy, and he was at risk of losing his house, his work trucks, and the tools that represented his livelihood. He had been working 18-hour days, trying to complete enough projects to generate the cash flow he needed to stay afloat, but the mathematics of his situation were inexorable. Denise and Robert were dealing with financial pressures that were even more severe than I had realized during our family conversations. Robert's unemployment had lasted longer than they had initially expected, and they had been forced to use credit cards and home equity loans to cover basic living expenses like mortgage payments, utilities, and groceries. They were now over $80,000 in debt, and their house was at risk of foreclosure within the next 6 months. Robert's efforts to find new employment had been unsuccessful, partly because the pharmaceutical industry was still contracting, and partly because his age and salaried history made him an expensive hire compared to younger candidates. Most disturbingly, Robert had been diagnosed with a recurrence of the testicular cancer he had fought 5 years earlier. The medical bills from his previous treatment had already strained their finances, and the new diagnosis meant more expensive treatments, more time away from work, and medical costs that their insurance would only partially cover. The family had been keeping Robert's diagnosis secret from the rest of us, not wanting to burden anyone else with their problems, and hoping that his treatment would be successful enough to make the secrecy worthwhile. But the stress of dealing with a life-threatening illness while facing financial ruin had been taking a devastating toll on their entire family. All 3 of my children's families were facing serious financial crises, and all 3 of them knew that they were named as equal beneficiaries in my will. My estate, which included my house, my savings, and Charles's life insurance investments, was worth approximately $750,000. Divided 3 ways, each of my children would inherit about $250,000, enough money to solve any of their current financial problems. Mrs. Barnes, Detective Coleman said during her 3rd visit to my hospital room, your children are all facing significant financial pressures, and they all stand to inherit substantial assets when you die. That gives all of them potential motives for attempted murder. Are you saying that one of my children tried to kill me for money? I'm saying that we have to consider all possibilities. Financial desperation is one of the most common motives for violence within families, especially when elderly parents have substantial assets and adult children are facing serious financial crises. The thought that one of my children would kill me for money was almost unbearable. These were people I had raised from babies, people I had sacrificed for and supported through every difficulty in their lives. I had changed their diapers, nursed them through childhood illnesses, helped them with homework, attended their school events, celebrated their achievements, and comforted them through their failures and disappointments.
The idea that they would see me as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance, that my death would be welcomed as a solution to their financial problems, was heartbreaking in ways that went beyond the physical trauma of the poisoning itself. But the evidence was mounting. Someone had put digitalis in my apple pie, knowing that it would interact with my heart medication and potentially kill me. And the people who had the most to gain from my death were the same people who had access to my kitchen, knowledge of my medical conditions, and familiarity with my cooking routines. On my 4th day in the hospital, I received visits from all 3 of my children. Their reactions to my poisoning and to the police investigation were revealing in ways they probably didn't realize, providing insights into their characters and motivations that I had never seen during our comfortable Sunday dinner conversations. Marcus arrived first, looking haggard and stressed in a way that seemed to go beyond normal concern for his mother's health. He had dark circles under his eyes,
and his usually neat appearance was disheveled in a way that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well or paying attention to his personal grooming. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted the flowers he had brought, and I could smell alcohol on his breath, even though it was only mid-morning.
"Mom, I'm so glad you're okay," he said, hugging me carefully and settling into the chair beside my bed. "When we heard you were in the hospital, we thought we might lose you." "Who's we, Marcus?" I asked, studying his face for signs of deception or genuine emotion. "All of us. The whole family is worried sick about you. Linda's been crying since we got the call, and the boys keep asking when you're coming home." "Are you worried about me, or are you worried about losing your inheritance?" The question seemed to catch him completely off guard. His face went pale, and he looked at me with an expression of shock and hurt that would have been convincing if I hadn't known about his financial problems and the desperate situation he was facing at work. "Mom, what are you talking about? Why would you say something like that?" "I know about your problems at work, Marcus. I know about the money you've lost and the trouble you're in with the bank." His expression changed immediately, becoming defensive and angry in a way that confirmed Detective Coleman's information was accurate. The mask of concern slipped, revealing the frightened, desperate man underneath who was facing the destruction of everything he had worked to build. "Who told you about that? Have you been investigating me? Do you think I'm some kind of criminal?"
"The police told me. They're investigating everyone who was at Sunday dinner, and they've discovered some very interesting information about everyone's financial situations." "Mom, you can't seriously think that I would hurt you? I would never do anything to harm you, no matter how much trouble I'm in. You're my mother, for God's sakes." "Someone tried to kill me, Marcus. Someone who was at my dinner table, someone who had access to my kitchen, someone who knew about my heart medication and understood how to use it as a weapon. It wasn't me. I swear to you on Dad's grave, it wasn't me. I may have made some mistakes at work, but I would never hurt you." "Then who was it? You tell me who else had the opportunity and the motive." Marcus didn't have an answer for that question, and his visit ended with both of us upset and suspicious of each other in ways that felt foreign and painful. As he left, I could see the weight of his financial crisis pressing down on him like a physical burden, making him walk with the hunched shoulders of a man who was carrying more than he could bear. Denise came that afternoon, bringing flowers and acting as if nothing unusual had happened beyond a normal medical emergency that had fortunately turned out well. She was trying to maintain the cheerful, caring daughter persona that she had always projected, but I could see the strain around her eyes and in the way she held her shoulders, as if she was bracing herself against some invisible blow. "Mom, you gave us such a scare," she said brightly, arranging the flowers in a vase and fussing with my blankets in a way that seemed designed to avoid making eye contact. "But you look so much better today. The color is back in your cheeks."
"Denise, someone tried to poison me. This wasn't an accident or a random medical emergency that we can just move past and forget about." "I know, and it's just horrible. Who would do such a thing to you? You're the most loving, generous person I know. It doesn't make any sense." "Someone who was at Sunday dinner. Someone who had access to my kitchen and knew about my heart medication. Someone who saw my death as a solution to their problems." "But that could be anyone in the family. We all help in the kitchen, and we all know about your medications. We've all been worried about your heart condition for years." "That's exactly the problem, Denise. It had to be someone in the family, someone who knows me well enough to plan this kind of attack." Denise seemed genuinely upset by the idea that a family member might be responsible, but she also seemed nervous in a way that made me wonder what she might be hiding. Her cheerful facade was cracking,
revealing the anxiety and desperation that she had been concealing behind her volunteer work and her focus on her children's activities. "Mom, you know we all love you. No one in our family would ever hurt you. We depend on you too much. We need you too much." Someone in our family did hurt me, Denise. Someone tried to kill me using my own cooking as the weapon.
Maybe it was an accident. Maybe someone made a mistake with medications or something. Maybe one of the grandchildren was playing with pills and didn't understand what they were doing. The police have confirmed it was deliberate. Someone put a massive dose of digitalis in my apple pie, enough to kill me several times over. This wasn't a childish prank or an accidental overdose. In the pie? But we all ate the pie. If someone put poison in the pie, wouldn't we all have gotten sick? Several people did get sick, but not as sick as I did because you don't take heart medication that would compound the effect of the digitalis. Denise was quiet for a moment, processing this information and probably thinking about her own mild symptoms from Sunday evening. "This is just crazy, Mom. I can't believe someone in our family would do this." I couldn't believe it either, but the evidence is clear, and the police have discovered that everyone in our family is facing serious financial problems that none of you have told me about. What kind of financial problems? The kind that might make someone desperate enough to commit murder for an inheritance. The kind that make people do things they never thought they were capable of. When Denise left, she was crying, and I could see that the weight of her family's financial crisis and her husband's medical condition was almost more than she could bear. But I still couldn't tell whether her tears were motivated by genuine grief over my situation or by fear that her own secrets might be exposed.
Jerome's visit was the most difficult and revealing. He came that evening, still wearing his work clothes and looking exhausted in a way that went beyond normal physical tiredness. He had the defeated posture of a man who was fighting battles he couldn't win, and his usual confidence had been replaced by something that looked very much like despair. "Mom, how are you feeling?" he asked, settling heavily into the chair beside my bed and taking my hand in his work-callous fingers. "I'm alive, which is more than whoever poisoned me intended." "Poison? Are you sure that's what happened? Maybe it was just food poisoning or some kind of allergic reaction." The toxicology test confirmed it. Someone put digitalis in my apple pie, enough to kill me if I hadn't gotten medical attention quickly enough. Jerome sat quietly for a long moment, and I could see that he was struggling with something he didn't know how to say. His shoulders sagged with the weight of burdens he had been carrying alone, and his eyes had the hollow look of someone who had been pushed beyond his limits. "Mom, this is insane. Who would want to hurt you? You're the foundation of this family. Without you, we'd all fall apart." Someone who needs money badly enough to kill for it. Someone who sees my death as the solution to problems that seem insurmountable.
What's that supposed to mean? It means I know about your business problems, Jerome. I know about the bankruptcy and the lawsuits and the fact that you're about to lose everything you've worked to build. His face flushed with anger and embarrassment, but I could also see relief in his eyes, as if he was tired of carrying the burden of his secrets alone. "So you think I tried to kill you for your money? You think I'm capable of murdering my own mother? I think someone at my dinner table tried to kill me, and I think money was the motive. The police have discovered that all 3 of my children are facing serious financial crises that you've all been hiding from me. Well, it wasn't me. I may be broke, I may be facing bankruptcy, but I'm not a murderer. I would never hurt you, Mom. Never." "Then who was it? You tell me who else had the opportunity and the motive."
Jerome was quiet for a long time, thinking about the question with the careful consideration that he brought to all his construction projects. When he finally spoke, his words would prove to be the key that unlocked the entire mystery. "Mom, I need you to tell me the truth about something." "What?" "On Sunday, when you were in the kitchen getting ice for your drink, did you notice anything unusual about the pie?" "What do you mean, unusual?"
Did you see anyone near it? Did you notice if it looked different or smelled different? Jerome was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him thinking back to Sunday afternoon, trying to remember details that might be significant. His construction work had trained him to be observant about small details that others might miss, and I could see him methodically reviewing his memories like he was inspecting a building for structural problems. Now that you mention it, when I went to get ice from the freezer, Linda was standing right next to the pie on the counter. She had a small container in her hand, like a pill bottle or something. It looked like she might have been putting something into the pie filling. Are you sure about this? I didn't think anything of it at the time. I figured she was just taking one of her vitamins or maybe adding some spice that you had forgotten. But she moved away from the pie real quick when she saw me coming, like she didn't want me to see what she was doing. This was the first concrete evidence that pointed toward a specific person rather than vague suspicions about motives and opportunities. Linda, the registered nurse, who worked in cardiac care, who would know exactly how digitalis worked and how to use it as a poison, who had access to medical supplies through her job at the hospital. Did you tell the police about this? No, I didn't think it was important. Linda's family, and she's a nurse. I figured she was just helping with the cooking or taking her medication. Should I have mentioned it?
Yes, Jerome. You need to call Detective Coleman right now and tell her exactly what you just told me. After Jerome left to call the detective, I lay in my hospital bed thinking about Linda and trying to understand why she would want me dead. She had never seemed hostile toward me, and our relationship had always been cordial, if not particularly warm. She had always been helpful during family gatherings, appreciative of my cooking, and supportive of family traditions. But Linda was married to Marcus, and Marcus was facing criminal charges and financial ruin that could destroy their family's future. If I died, Marcus would inherit about $250,000, which would be exactly enough to cover his debts and avoid prison. And Linda, with her medical background, would know how to make my death look like a natural heart attack that no one would question. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces fit together. Linda had the knowledge to plan the poisoning, the access to obtain digitalis through her job at the hospital, and the motive to save her family from disgrace and financial ruin. She also had the opportunity during Sunday dinner, when people were constantly moving in and out of the kitchen and no one was paying close attention to who was doing what. Detective Coleman arrived within an hour of Jerome's call, and she questioned him extensively about what he'd seen in the kitchen. His description of Linda standing near the pie with a small container was exactly the kind of evidence the detective had been looking for, the missing piece that could transform suspicion into probable cause. "Mrs. Barnes, we're going to need to search your house for evidence, particularly your kitchen and any areas where medications might be stored. We're also going to request a search warrant for Linda's house in her workplace at the hospital." Do you really think Linda tried to kill me? I think we have enough evidence to treat her as a serious suspect. A cardiac nurse would have easy access to digitalis, would know how to calculate a lethal dose, and would understand exactly how it would interact with your existing heart medication. The next day, Detective Coleman returned with disturbing news from the search of Linda's workplace. Hospital security footage showed Linda accessing the medication storage area on Friday afternoon, 2 days before our Sunday dinner. She had signed out a quantity of digitalis that was significantly larger than what she needed for her assigned patients, claiming she needed extra medication to replace a vial that had allegedly been broken. When questioned about the discrepancy,
Linda claimed she had accidentally broken a vial and needed extra medication to replace it. But there was no record of a broken vial in the hospital's waste disposal system, and no one else remembered Linda reporting any accidents with medications that day. More damning evidence came from the search of Linda's purse, which she had left in her locker at the hospital. Hidden in a small zippered compartment, police found an empty vial that had contained liquid digitalis, along with a small syringe that could have been used to inject the poison into food. Mrs. Barnes, we have enough evidence to arrest Linda for attempted murder, Detective Coleman informed me. But before we do, I want to give you the opportunity to speak with her if you think it might help us understand her motive or get a confession that could spare your family a lengthy trial.
You want me to confront the woman who tried to kill me? Only if you feel safe doing so. We would arrange for the meeting to take place here in the hospital, with police officers present for your protection. Sometimes hearing the victim's perspective can break down a suspect's defenses and lead to a confession. I agreed to the meeting, partly because I wanted to understand why Linda had tried to kill me, and partly because I hoped she might confess and spare my family the ordeal of a lengthy trial that would expose all of our private problems to public scrutiny. Linda arrived at my hospital room that evening, accompanied by Detective Coleman and another police officer. She looked nervous and defensive, but she was still trying to maintain the innocent facade she had been projecting since Sunday. She was dressed in her nurse's uniform, having come directly from work, and she carried herself with the professional competence that had made her a respected member of the cardiac care team. "Natalie, I'm so glad you're feeling better," she said, settling into the chair beside my bed as if this were a normal family visit. "We've all been so worried about you. Marcus has barely slept since we heard about your hospitalization." "Have you, Linda? Have you really been worried about me?" "Of course I have. Your family. You're the center of our family, the person who holds us all together." "Family doesn't usually try to poison each other."
Linda's expression didn't change, but I could see something shift behind her eyes, a calculation about whether denial was still a viable strategy given the evidence that was mounting against her. "I don't know what you're talking about, Natalie. Who would want to hurt you?" "I'm talking about the digitalis you stole from the hospital. I'm talking about the empty vials they found in your purse. I'm talking about Jerome seeing you standing next to my pie with a small container in your hand." Linda was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her mind working through her options, weighing the likelihood that she could still talk her way out of the situation against the growing evidence of her guilt. "Natalie, you have to understand," she finally said, abandoning the pretense of innocence and speaking with the calm, rational tone she used when explaining medical procedures to patients. "Marcus is going to prison. He's going to lose everything, and I'm going to lose everything with him. So you decided to kill me for the inheritance money." "I decided to save my family. Marcus made some mistakes at work, but he's not a bad person. He was just under pressure to perform, and he took some risks that didn't pay off. If he inherits your money, he can pay back what he owes and avoid criminal charges. Our children won't have to live with the shame of having a father in prison. And I won't have to die for that to happen."
You're 72 years old, Natalie. You've lived a good life, a full life. You've raised your children, seen your grandchildren grow up, been married to a man who loved you. Marcus and I have 30 more years ahead of us, and I couldn't let his mistake destroy our future. The casual way she talked about my death, as if it were nothing more than an inconvenience to be solved through careful planning, was chilling. Linda had calculated that my life was worth less than her family's financial security, and she had acted on that calculation without any apparent guilt or remorse. "Did Marcus know what you were planning?" "Of course not. Marcus would never have agreed to hurt you. He loves you. even if he's too proud to ask for your help when he needs it most. So you decided to make the decision for him. I decided to do what needed to be done to protect my family. That's what mothers do. We make the hard choices that no one else is willing to make. Detective Coleman stepped forward at that point, recognizing that Linda's confession was complete and legally admissible. Linda Patterson, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Natalie Barnes. She read Linda the Miranda rights while I watched the woman who had tried to kill me finally face the consequences of her actions. Linda's arrest sent shockwaves through our family that reverberated for months afterward. The revelation that someone we had trusted, someone who had been part of our Sunday dinner tradition for over 20 years, had calculated my murder as a solution to their financial problems, changed everything about how we related to each other.
Linda was charged with attempted murder in the first degree, theft of controlled substances, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The hospital security footage showing her taking extra digitalis, the empty vial found in her purse, Jerome's eyewitness testimony, and her own confession to me in the hospital room. The trial took place 8 months later, during which more details about the extent of Marcus's financial crimes came to light. The bank's investigation revealed that he had been manipulating client accounts for over a year, trying to cover losses with increasingly risky investments that only made the situation worse. Linda was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. The judge noted that her crime was particularly heinous because she had used her medical knowledge to plan what should have been an undetectable murder, and because she had violated the trust of both her profession and her family. Marcus, faced with the investigation into his embezzlement, chose to cooperate fully with authorities. His cooperation, combined with his genuine ignorance of Linda's murder plot, helped him receive a sentence of 3 years probation and mandatory restitution payments that would take him most of his remaining working years to complete. The bank fired him immediately, and his professional reputation was destroyed. He found work as a teller at a small credit union, earning a fraction of his former salary and working under the constant scrutiny of managers who knew about his criminal history.
The Sunday dinner tradition ended abruptly after Linda's arrest. The trust that had held our family together for 15 years was broken in ways that seemed impossible to repair. The dining room where we had shared so many meals and memories became a place of painful associations, and no one suggested that we should continue gathering there. Marcus and I attempted to rebuild our relationship, but it was fundamentally changed by what had happened. He carried the crushing guilt of knowing that his poor decisions had motivated his wife's crime, while I struggled with the trauma of knowing that someone had calculated my death as a solution to their problems. Our conversations became stilted and careful, focused on safe topics like the weather and his children's activities. The easy intimacy we had once shared was gone, replaced by a politeness that felt forced and unnatural. Marcus aged visibly in the months following Linda's conviction, developing the hollow-eyed look of someone who was carrying a burden too heavy for his shoulders. Jerome and Denise continued to visit me individually, but the easy intimacy of our family gatherings was gone forever. We were all more cautious with each other, more aware of the potential for hidden problems and unspoken desperation that could turn family members into enemies. Jerome's business eventually recovered somewhat, though he never again achieved the level of success he had enjoyed before his financial crisis. The stress of nearly losing everything had taught him to be more conservative in his approach to projects and more careful about clients who made unrealistic demands or were slow to pay.
Denise and Robert's situation improved gradually after Robert's cancer treatment proved successful and he found new employment with a different pharmaceutical company. The medical bills remained a burden for years, but they were able to avoid foreclosure and slowly rebuild their financial stability. 6 months after Linda's conviction, I made several major changes to my life that reflected my new understanding of how fragile family relationships could be. I sold my house, unable to continue living in a place where someone had tried to murder me, and moved to a well-regarded senior living community that offered independence with security. More importantly, I decided to divide my estate among my 3 children while I was still alive, giving them the financial help they needed without requiring my death. The irony was not lost on me that Linda's attempt to gain access to my inheritance through murder had ultimately led to my decision to distribute that inheritance while I was still living. Robert's cancer treatment was fully covered. Jerome was able to save his business and pay off his debts, and Marcus was able to make his restitution payments without facing additional financial hardship. The money solved their immediate problems, but it couldn't repair the emotional damage caused by Linda's actions. The famous apple pie recipe died with our Sunday dinner tradition. I never made it again, and I never taught it to anyone else. The recipe that had once been my proud legacy became too painful to continue, too associated with betrayal and attempted murder to ever bring me joy again.
Some family legacies are meant to be preserved and passed down through generations, but others become too tainted by tragedy to survive. The apple pie recipe fell into the second category, a casualty of Linda's crime that could never be recovered. Today, 4 years after the poisoning, I live in a comfortable apartment in a senior community where I have made friends who know nothing about my family's history. I participate in activities that keep me engaged with life, book clubs, gardening groups, and volunteer work that gives me a sense of purpose without the emotional complications of family relationships. I found peace in smaller gatherings, simpler meals, and relationships built on honesty rather than long-standing traditions. My new friends are people who chose to be in my life rather than people who were born into it, and there's something liberating about starting fresh at 76 years old. The trauma of the poisoning has faded somewhat, though I still have moments of anxiety when eating food prepared by others. I've learned to manage these feelings through counseling and medication, accepting that some scars never completely heal, but don't have to define your entire life. Linda is serving her sentence at the Tennessee Prison for Women, where she works in the medical unit caring for other inmates. According to Marcus, who occasionally updates me on her status through brief, uncomfortable phone calls, she has never expressed genuine remorse for trying to kill me. She continues to believe that her actions were justified by her desire to protect her family, viewing herself as a victim of circumstances rather than a perpetrator of attempted murder.
This attitude has apparently made her unpopular with other inmates and has hurt her chances for early parole. Marcus has struggled with depression and guilt in the years since Linda's conviction. Though he has gradually begun to rebuild his life, he remarried recently, a quiet ceremony that I attended despite my mixed feelings about celebrating new love, while his first wife serves a prison sentence for trying to murder his mother. His new wife, Sarah, is a widow with grown children of her own, someone who understands the complications of middle-age relationships and doesn't seem threatened by the chaos of Marcus's family history. She has been good for him, providing the emotional support he needs while maintaining appropriate boundaries with the rest of our family. Tyler and Michael have both struggled with the knowledge that their mother tried to commit murder, though they have handled it in different ways. Tyler has thrown himself into his studies and career, graduating with honors and landing a good job with a respected financial firm.
Michael has been more rebellious, getting into minor trouble at school and pushing against the boundaries that his father tries to establish. Both boys see me occasionally, but our relationship is complicated by their conflicted feelings about their mother and their awareness that she tried to kill me. They love Linda despite what she did, and they feel guilty about that love, creating an emotional tangle that makes normal family relationships almost impossible. Jerome has never married again, though he has had several relationships that showed promise but ultimately failed to develop into something permanent. He claims to be content with his solitary life, but I can see the loneliness in his eyes during our occasional visits.
He has become more philosophical about life since Linda's crime, developing an interest in Buddhism and meditation that helps him cope with the stress of running a small business and the emotional aftermath of our family's tragedy. His construction work has evolved to focus almost exclusively on historic preservation, projects that connect him to the past while building something lasting for the future. Denise has found purpose in volunteer work related to mental health advocacy, partly as a way of processing her own family's experience with crises, and partly as a way of helping other families navigate similar challenges. She speaks at conferences about the warning signs of financial desperation and family violence, sharing our story as a cautionary tale about the importance of communication and early intervention. Robert's cancer remains in remission, and their financial situation has stabilized enough that they can plan for Keisha's college graduation and Jasmine's upcoming high school graduation. The family has grown closer as a result of their shared trauma, developing a deeper appreciation for each other and for the fragility of life. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Linda's clan had succeeded, if I had died that Sunday night as she had intended. My death would probably have been attributed to my heart condition, and my family would have mourned me as a beloved matriarch who had died peacefully after a final meal with her loved ones. Marcus would have inherited his share of my estate and been able to cover his embezzlement before it was discovered. Linda would have achieved her goal of saving her family through my murder, and she would probably still be working as a respected cardiac nurse instead of serving a 25-year prison sentence.
Instead, I survived to learn difficult truths about the relationship between love and money, about how desperation can transform family members into enemies, and about how the people who know us best are also the people best positioned to betray us. The Barnes family Sunday dinner tradition lasted for 15 years and ended with attempted murder. It's not the legacy I would have chosen, but it's the truth of what happened when financial desperation met family loyalty, and desperation won. I've learned to find contentment in my new life, though it's very different from what I expected when I was younger. The independence of senior living suits me in ways I didn't anticipate, providing structure without the isolation that many elderly people experience. My apartment has a small kitchen where I cook simple meals for myself, though I rarely bake anymore. The smells of cinnamon and apples still trigger memories that are too painful to revisit regularly. Instead, I've discovered new interests: watercolor painting, Italian language lessons, and a memoir writing group where I'm slowly working through the story of my family's tragedy. And every time I see an apple pie now, whether in a bakery window or at a restaurant dessert display, I remember not the 40 years I spent perfecting that recipe, but the night someone used my own cooking to try to take my life. Some memories are stronger than others, and some truths are too important to forget. The story serves as a reminder that family relationships, no matter how strong they appear, can be fragile in the face of financial desperation and moral compromise. It's a lesson I hope other families can learn without having to experience the trauma that taught it to me. 4 years later,
I'm still alive, still learning, and still finding ways to create meaning and connection in my life, despite the betrayal that shattered my understanding of family loyalty. It's not the ending I would have written for my story, but it's authentic in ways that my previous life wasn't always. And sometimes that authenticity feels like enough.